Imagine standing in the driveway of your own home, watching flames devour every piece of your past, your clothes, your memories, your identity. Your world is falling apart, but instead of feeling defeated, you realize this fire isn't just destroying, it's transforming. This is the story of rising from the ashes, of rediscovering strength, and of building a life worth living. A cold breeze brushed against my face as I stood in the driveway of the home I once called my sanctuary. The crisp autumn air stung my skin, but it was nothing compared to the searing pain in my chest. In front of me, my belongings, clothes, keepsakes, fragments of my life, were burning in a pile. The flames crackled, their light casting flickering shadows on the faces of my husband, Tom, and his mother, Evelyn. I never imagined I'd end up here. For years, I had worked to build a life with Tom, convincing myself that the man I married still existed beneath his cold demeanor. But tonight, as I watched the flames devour pieces of my past, I realized just how much I'd been fooling myself. Tom's face was twisted in rage, his usual calm shattered. He didn't even flinch as he threw another piece of my life into the fire. "You're done," he spat, his voice cold and unrecognizable. "Sign the papers and leave." Next to him, Evelyn stood with her arms crossed, her smug expression making my stomach churn. "It's about time, Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "She's never been good enough for you." Her words cut deep, but not as deeply as they once would have. I'd heard them before, over and over, in every backhanded comment she had made about my cooking, my choices, my very existence. For years, I swallowed my pride and tried to please her, hoping she'd see I was worthy of being part of her family. But no matter what I did, I was always the outsider. Tonight, though, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to cry, not this time. I wasn't going to beg or plead for them to see my worth. Instead, I stood frozen, watching the embers of my life float into the night sky. "Is this what you wanted, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice steadier than I thought it could be. "To break me? To make me disappear?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The triumph in her eyes told me everything. I turned to Tom, the man I had once loved with every fiber of my being. I had believed in him, trusted him. But that trust had eroded over the years, chipped away by his indifference, his silence, as Evelyn tore me down. And now this. "I loved you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I gave you everything I had." Tom didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. He just stood there, watching the fire as if it held the answer to all his problems. The smell of burning fabric stung my nose, and I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I walked into the house. My feet carried me to the kitchen table, where a stack of divorce papers lay waiting. My hands shook as I picked up the pen, but not from fear. This time, it was from a strange, newfound clarity. With every signature, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Each stroke of the pen was a step away from the woman I had become, and a step toward the woman I wanted to be. When I finished, I stood up and walked back to the doorway. Tom was watching me now, his eyes narrowed as if he couldn't believe what I was doing. Evelyn opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. Walking away from that driveway felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. The cold Boston air bit at my face as I tightened my coat around me, clutching my purse like a lifeline. Everything I owned had gone up in flames, and everything familiar was now behind me. All I had was the weight of my choices and the echo of Evelyn's parting words. Good riddance. I didn't look back. As I walked down the quiet, tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, my mind raced. Where would I go? What would I do? I had no clothes, no home, and barely any money. My phone buzzed in my hand, the screen lighting up with Sophia's name. My heart lifted slightly. Sophia, my best friend from college, had always been there when I needed her, even when I didn't realize I did. I answered with a shaky voice. "Sophia." "Sarah," she said, concern flooding her tone. "I saw your texts. Are you okay? Where are you?" I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I just left. Everything is gone. "Stay where you are," she said firmly. "Tell me where you are. I'm coming to get you." I gave her my location and sank onto a park bench to wait. My body felt heavy, as if the weight of the past few years had finally caught up with me. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't want to cry, not here, not now. The sound of an engine broke the silence, and I looked up to see Sophia's car pulling up to the curb. She jumped out, her arms open wide, and before I knew it, she was hugging me tightly. The familiar scent of her floral perfume brought a small sense of comfort. "Come on," she said, guiding me to the passenger seat. "Let's get you out of here." The drive to her apartment was quiet, except for her occasional glances at me, her dark eyes filled with concern. When we arrived, she ushered me inside and settled me on her couch with a blanket and a steaming cup of tea. "Start from the beginning," Sophia said gently, sitting across from me. I told her everything. The years of criticism, the suffocating presence of Evelyn, and the fire that felt like the final blow. As I spoke, it all came pouring out, like a dam breaking inside me. I didn't try to hold back. I told her about the moment I snapped, about signing the divorce papers, about walking away. Sophia listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to anger to sadness as I unraveled the story. When I finally finished, she leaned forward, her hand gripping mine. "Sarah," she said, her voice steady, "none of this is your fault. You hear me? None of it. Tom and Evelyn, they're toxic. You did the right thing by walking away." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had carried the weight of their criticism, their blame, as if it were my own burden to bear. But now, sitting in Sophia's warm living room, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was right. Over the next few days, Sophia became my rock. She let me clothes, cooked meals, and helped me make a plan. "One step at a time," she said, her tone firm but kind. "First, we get you the basics. Then, we figure out what's next." We hit up secondhand stores, piecing together a simple wardrobe. As I tried on clothes, I felt a small sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I chose outfits based on what I liked, not what Evelyn would approve of or what Tom found appropriate. Next, Sophia helped me update my resume. Sitting at her dining table, I stared at the screen, feeling a pang of self-doubt. It had been years since I'd worked in marketing, and I wondered if I still had the skills. "You're still you," Sophia reminded me, her voice firm. "You're creative, smart, and capable. Don't let them take that from you." Her encouragement gave me the push I needed. I started applying to jobs, and though rejection emails began trickling in, I refused to give up. Each application felt like a step forward, a step toward reclaiming my independence. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Sophia turned to me. "Sarah, have you thought about seeing someone? A therapist, I mean. You've been through a lot." I hesitated. Therapy wasn't something I'd ever considered before, but the idea made sense. "Maybe," I said quietly. "It might help." Sophia smiled. "I'll help you find someone. You're doing so well, but you don't have to do it all alone." Her words stayed with me. For years, I had felt alone, even when surrounded by people. But now, sitting in Sophia's apartment, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I had her and I had myself. That was enough for now. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking towards something better. The weeks at Sophia's apartment turned into a month, and slowly, I began to rediscover parts of myself I thought I had lost forever. My days were filled with small but significant victories. Landing my first interview, finding a therapist who felt like the right fit, and even cooking meals that weren't picked apart by someone else's criticism. One crisp morning, as I sat on Sophia's balcony with a cup of tea, I scrolled through job listings on my laptop. A particular post caught my eye, a marketing position at a boutique firm specializing in creative campaigns. I hesitated, reading the description over and over. It felt like the perfect fit, but self-doubt crept in. What if I'm not good enough? I whispered to myself, staring at the Apply Now button. "You're more than good enough." Sophia's voice interrupted my thoughts as she stepped onto the balcony. She had an uncanny ability to know exactly when I needed a push. "Just hit the button, Sarah. The worst that can happen is they say no, and you'll still be exactly where you are now." Her words gave me the nudge I needed. I clicked the button and sent my application out into the world, my heart pounding in anticipation. Later that week, I got an email inviting me to an interview. The news made my stomach flip with equal parts excitement and terror. Sophia, ever the cheerleader, helped me prepare, quizzing me with mock questions and reminding me of my strengths. "You've got this," she said confidently as I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my thrifted blazer on the morning of the interview. "You're going to blow them away." Walking into the firm's sleek office building, I felt the familiar nerves bubbling beneath the surface, but this time, I didn't let them take over. The interviewer, Diane, was a poised woman in her early 40s with an air of authority that somehow didn't feel intimidating. She asked about my experience, my ideas, and why I thought I'd be a good fit for the company. I spoke honestly, sharing not just my professional accomplishments, but also the personal journey that had reignited my creativity. "I've learned to see things from a fresh perspective," I said, my voice steady. "And I think that's what makes my ideas unique." Diane nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We value authenticity here, Sarah. I think you'd be a great addition to the team." When the job offer came through a few days later, I nearly cried. It wasn't just a paycheck or a title, it was a lifeline, a chance to rebuild my life on my terms. That evening, Sophia and I celebrated with takeout and wine, laughing and toasting to new beginnings. "This is just the start," Sophia said, clinking her glass against mine. "You're on your way, Sarah." Work became a welcome distraction, filling my days with purpose and creativity. Diane quickly became a mentor, pushing me to think outside the box and trust my instincts. For the first time in years, I felt valued, not for what I could do for someone else, but for who I was. But as fulfilling as work was, I knew there were still parts of myself I needed to address. My therapist, Dr. Patel, helped me unpack the years of criticism and control I had endured. She challenged me to confront the guilt and self-blame I carried, reminding me that healing was a process. "Be patient with yourself, Sarah," she often said during our sessions. "You've been through a lot, and it's okay to take your time." Her words resonated, and I began to let go of the unrealistic expectations I had placed on myself. Slowly, I started exploring new hobbies, things that brought me joy without any strings attached. Painting became my escape, the colors on the canvas reflecting emotions I couldn't always put into words. I even started attending a local yoga class, finding solace in the quiet rhythm of breath and movement. One afternoon, while walking home from work, I passed by a women's shelter with a sign in the window, "Volunteers needed." I paused, staring at the sign, feeling a pull I couldn't explain. The next day, I found myself inside, speaking with the shelter coordinator about opportunities to help. The shelter became another outlet for my energy and newfound sense of purpose. I met women from all walks of life, each with their own stories of survival and resilience. Listening to them, I felt a deep connection, a shared understanding of what it meant to rebuild from the ground up. One woman, Maria, shared her story with me during a quiet moment at the shelter. She had left an abusive marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back, much like me. "It feels impossible at first," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But every small step makes a difference. You just have to keep moving forward." Her words stayed with me, a reminder of how far I'd come and how much further I could go. That night, I sat at my laptop and started drafting a blog post. Writing had always been cathartic for me, and now I wanted to share my journey, not just for myself, but for others who might be where I had been. The words flowed easily as I typed. I never thought I'd find myself here, starting over, building a life from scratch. But I've learned that sometimes the hardest moments in life are the ones that shape us the most. It's not easy, but it's worth it. If you're reading this and feeling lost, just know that you're not alone. Keep taking those small steps, one at a time. You're stronger than you think. As I hit publish, I felt a sense of release. This was my story, and it was only just beginning. The blog post I published that night unexpectedly became a turning point in my journey. I hadn't expected much, maybe a few views, perhaps a comment or two. But within days, my inbox was flooded with messages from readers. Women from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of heartbreak, resilience, and hope. Some thanked me for my honesty, saying it made them feel less alone. Others asked for advice, unsure of how to take their first steps toward freedom. Reading their words, I realized something profound. My story wasn't just mine. It was a thread in a larger tapestry of strength and survival, and by sharing it, I was helping others find their own voices. One evening, as I scrolled through the comments on my latest blog post, Sophia walked into the room holding 2 cups of tea. She set one down in front of me and leaned over my shoulder to glance at the screen. "You're really making an impact, Sarah," she said, her voice warm with pride. "Have you thought about taking this further?" I asked, looking up at her. "What do you mean?" She gestured to the screen. "These women are reaching out to you because they see you as someone who understands, someone who's been where they are. Maybe you could turn this into something bigger, workshops, support groups, even speaking engagements." The thought both excited and terrified me. The idea of standing in front of a crowd, sharing my story, felt daunting. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If my words could help one person, why not 10? Or 50? The opportunity to test Sophia's idea came sooner than I expected. A few weeks later, I received an email from a local community center inviting me to speak at their upcoming wellness event. They'd come across my blog and thought my story would resonate with their audience. My first instinct was to say no. The idea of standing on a stage, all eyes on me, was overwhelming. But Sophia, as always, was my rock. "You've got this," she said when I voiced my fears. "Just think of it as an extension of your blog. You're already sharing your story. You'll just be doing it out loud." Reluctantly, I agreed. The night of the event, I stood backstage, clutching my note cards with trembling hands. The sound of the audience murmuring on the other side of the curtain was almost too much to bear. But then I thought about all the women who had reached out to me, their stories, their struggles, their strength. This wasn't about me, it was about them. When my name was called, I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding, and for a moment, I froze. But then I looked out at the audience, at the faces of people who had come to listen, and the words began to flow. I spoke about the day I left, the fear and uncertainty, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding. I shared how I'd found my voice again through writing, how every small step had led me to this moment. As I spoke, I saw nods of understanding, tears in a few eyes, and even smiles of encouragement. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. I stood there, overwhelmed, as a line of women began forming to speak with me. One by one, they shared their stories, thanked me for mine, and asked how they could start their own journeys. That night, as I walked home, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was building something meaningful, not just for myself, but for others. Over the next few months, the blog evolved into a full-fledged platform. I started hosting online webinars, writing guides on topics like financial independence and self-care, and partnering with local organizations to provide resources for women in need. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost. But the biggest challenge came when a national nonprofit reached out, inviting me to speak at their annual conference. It was an opportunity one couldn't pass up, but it also meant stepping out of my comfort zone in a way I hadn't before. Sophia, of course, was my biggest cheerleader. "This is your moment, Sarah," she said the night before I left for the conference. "You've worked so hard for this. Go show them what you're made of." The conference was held in a sprawling hotel ballroom, filled with hundreds of attendees. As I took the stage, I felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but I also felt something else. Pride. This was my story, and I was ready to share it with the world. I spoke about the fire that had consumed my old life, about the ashes I had risen from, and about the strength I had found within myself. When I finished, the standing ovation brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, a woman approached me with tears streaming down her face. "You just told my story," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been so scared to leave, but hearing you tonight, I think I can do it." In that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The conference marked a pivotal moment in my journey. As I returned home, the fire within me burned brighter than ever, fueled by the stories I had heard and the connections I had made. The woman who had approached me, her trembling voice echoing in my ears, became a symbol of everything I wanted to achieve, not just survival, but empowerment for those who felt trapped and silenced. With Sophia's unwavering support and Rachel's legal expertise, I poured my energy into expanding Phoenix Rising. What had started as a blog and a dream was now transforming into a beacon of hope for countless women. We opened a new office, partnered with local shelters, and launched a hotline to provide immediate support for those in need. Each milestone felt like a step toward a brighter, more compassionate future. One day, as I was sorting through emails in our bustling office, a familiar name caught my eye, Linda. The subject line read, "Thank you for saving me." With a mix of curiosity and emotion, I opened the email. Linda wrote about how Phoenix Rising had inspired her to share her story publicly. She had started volunteering at a local shelter, offering her experience to help other women find their footing. "I never thought I'd find strength in my own pain," she wrote. "But watching you rise gave me the courage to try. Thank you, Sarah." Tears blurred my vision as I read her words. The ripple effect of my journey was spreading in ways I had never imagined. The months flew by, each day filled with purpose. Yet, even as life blossomed around me, I knew there was one final step in my healing. I needed closure, not just legally or emotionally, but spiritually. I had moved forward, but a part of me still carried the weight of the past. One crisp autumn afternoon, I found myself standing outside the house I had once called home. It looked different now. Darker, smaller, almost lifeless. I wasn't there for confrontation or validation. I was there for myself. As I stood there, I silently acknowledged the pain I had endured within those walls. Then, with a deep breath, I let it go. The anger, the hurt, the lingering questions, they no longer had a hold on me. I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in years. Back at the office, I gathered my team for a celebration. We had just reached a milestone. Phoenix Rising had officially helped over 1,000 women. As I looked around the room, filled with people who believed in our mission, I felt a swell of pride and gratitude. Sophia raised her glass. "To Sarah," she said, her voice steady with emotion. "You didn't just rise from the ashes. You built a fire that's lighting the way for so many others." The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time, I truly allowed myself to take in the magnitude of what we had accomplished. That night, as I sat in my apartment, now filled with mementos of a life rebuilt, I opened my laptop and started a new blog post. The title came to me instantly, "The Fire Within, A Journey of Resilience." I wrote about everything: the pain, the growth, the moments of doubt, and the triumphs. I wrote about the people who had lifted me up, the lessons I had learned, and the woman I had become. As I hit publish, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This chapter of my life wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation, about finding strength in vulnerability and courage in community. The fire that had once consumed my life hadn't just left ashes. It had ignited a spark that would continue to burn brightly, lighting the way for others to follow. And as I closed my laptop, I knew my story wasn't over. It was just beginning.